corso da Bombini.
Tante cose molto belle, voci di scrittura, sceneggiatura, che siamo coperti con parole con la nostra bellezza, insomma cerchiamo di dare della formazione ad altissimo livello a gente che chiaramente vuole confrontarsi con persone di questo tipo.
Hai ragione,
Io
non ci ho pensato.
creativo,
Vabbè, dai, ci siamo fatti.
E ho il piacere di vedere questa terza vostra che stasera farà un braccio sul suo nuovo metodo d'approccio al conflitto, e basta, mi taccio perché uno di qui per me per Antonio, chiaramente poi parla in inglese, se qualcuno ha bisogno di una traduzione come specifica o non capisce qualche cosa, alzi la mano e io traduco per voi, va bene?
Grazie.
Grazie.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you very much for coming. If you're not meant to be here, if you told your husband or your wife that you're out for the kids and you're here, everybody in the world will see you, so you'll get into trouble. All right. Okay. All right. So, a few years ago, when I was at Reigate, which was 20 years ago, studying calligraphy and heraldic painting, I started to do some research into copperplate script because I was told that the script derived from an engraver's tool, and I couldn't really understand why somebody would say that. Calligraphy comes from a scribe. It comes out of the hand of a scribe and is then given to the engraver to engrave. So all of the books 20 years ago, and still quite a lot of the books, say this. But it's wrong. So the most amazing thing about English roundhand is it originates out of Cancelleresca. And it's great to be in Italy talking about Cancelleresca to Italians, because you know you love your writing. So we're grateful to Cancelleresca Corsiva, Cancelleresca Formata, for giving us the basis of English roundhand. So with Cancelleresca, we have a bald serif, and essentially what happened was a writing master did this, and he forgot to fill the ball in. And that little mistake, coupled with what was happening in England at the time, as well as the influence of the Flemish scripts, these changes from hairlines to thicker strokes were done with moving from the corner of the nib onto the flat of the nib and back onto the corner and back onto the flat. And so all of these things just happen to come together just around the right time to help give us the birth of English roundhand. Now, the research that I've been doing over the last couple of years has led me to separate English roundhand into two aspects, into a sort of proto-English roundhand and a sort of fuller English roundhand. And it has to do with not just the tool, but with the shape of the letters, but I'm not really going to go into that. This evening's lecture is to talk to you about this new technology that I've developed around this manual that is coming out in a couple of months. Now, the most beautiful thing about this new technology is it uses meditation. So it requires you to breathe, to be relaxed. You know, you want to write, you pick up your pen and you're like, no. This requires you to look at the paper, check the paper, check the ink. Is the ink the right consistency? Are your nibs working? So one of the things I look at in the manual is how to test to see if the nib is going to work. We go, we buy some nibs, we get back home, we sit down, they don't work, and we think, oh, I'm really terrible at this. And, you know, lots of people say, a bad craftsman blames his tools. But if the tool is not going to work, then you can't do the writing. So understanding how to look for this information is really important. Once you get the tools together, and you make sure you go to the toilet first, because you don't want to start writing and then have to get up and run. So you go and you get ready, and you are in the frame of mind to write, and you sit down and you think, what am I going to do? Most people sit down and they start writing. At no point do they think, what are my intentions here? And so by being conscious of what you are intending to do, are you going to work on round letters, angular letters, ascenders, descenders, capitals, which group? By getting that into your mind and getting your mind ready and prepared to do that writing, you slow yourself down enough so that you are ready to do the writing. You're not rushed, you're not hurried. And then you start thinking, okay, so what are we actually going to do? And that is where this new technology has come from. Bless you. So I get thousands of emails from people asking questions about copperplate. Oh, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So over 20 years, I have millions of emails. And I started to look at these millions of emails as if I have nothing to do. And I started to look at what the questions were. What were people struggling with? So lots of people struggle with the height of the script, or the angle, or where is the pressure? How do you know when to press? I press really quickly. How do I regulate that? And one of the questions a lot of people were asking was, how wide is the letter? Now, most of us who've done copperplate script, we get a line, we know the angle, we're told, pick a height. Okay, so we pick a height. Great. How wide is the letter? Nobody tells us the width. So we have to write, oh, is it this wide? Oh, maybe that's wrong. Oh, maybe it's this wide. Oh, that's a little bit narrow. Oh, it must be somewhere around here. Well, if it's somewhere around here, every time you try to write it, you're not certain of the width. So I started to think, how do we fix this problem? So I came up with this technology. I call it technology because it is technology. Now, when we're at school, we're never told as children to just draw a circle. They tell you to draw a square first. And you put these little marks, and these marks create a tangential point that you touch. So I call this tangential touching. So by aiming for the marks, So I started to think, what are some of the other problems with copperplate script? When you do copperplate script, you do a letter, and then you have to do it again further down, and it gets this big. And the letters start to grow. So how do you stop the letters from growing? So I realized that with the tangential touching, you are confined to an angular structure. And that's where I came up with the angular confinement system. So I just need to check if this is. And so I came up with this. Now, I love Star Trek. And lots of people say, oh yeah, you're a Trekkie. Yes, I am a Trekkie. I'm happy to admit it. And I love technology. And I read about quantum mechanics, and I read about physics. And, if I'm giggling in bed, my husband usually says to me, which science magazine are you reading? Which is quite funny. So I based the names that I call the parts of this particular technology on science. So the first thing I had was angular confinement. Now, based on this theory, this principle rather, because this is not a theory, I started to think one of the problems that people experience with copperplate script is they don't know where the curves are. But if you give them a confinement system, you can help them to plot the curves. So we have So we start using the tangential touching. So we have one, and middle, 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 and middle. So you get Kurtaki brush, Kurtaki vermilion. So those of you who are here tomorrow, you'll get to work with this vermilion, which is really beautiful. But I'm going to warn you, do not wear clothing that you like. Because if you get this vermilion on your clothing, you will have to dye the clothing vermilion. And by fitting the letter into the angular confinement, you can plot where the curves are. Now this works for every letter. This system is amazing. I'm not just saying it's amazing. I'm actually repeating what other people have said. So it's, I'm not just boasting, but I am boasting because it's amazing. It's an amazing system, and I developed it because I had so many people struggle with this script, and I couldn't understand why people were struggling with it. So I wanted to make it simple. I wanted people to be able to use the script and learn and grow with it. Now the manual has 4 facets. Each facet has 2 aspects. So we have angular confinement 1, where you fit the confinement, you fit a monoline letter into this. Now, the reason why I've opted for a monoline letter is this. When you study Roman capitals, you learn to draw them with a pencil first. But when you learn copperplate, they give you a nib and paper and ink. So you're not only struggling with the nib, you're also struggling with the script. Well, by understanding the skeletal structure, you get a better sense of what the letter is. So we know that this monoline you can fit the angular confinement around this monoline as well. So I give you, in the manual, I give you the monoline. So in the angular confinement 1 is the angular confinement alone, and you plot the monoline in. Then the angular confinement 2 reinforces what you know, so you can start plotting around the monoline. So they help to reinforce each other. Now, this is all based on the theory that the line of universal beauty, and I call this the line of universal beauty, I do not refer to this as a compound curve. Because in physics, this is more like a reverse curve than a compound curve. So in the manual, I also have an image of what a compound curve looks like in physics. Now, when we start looking at the script, the line of universal beauty is actually two little and one big straight line. A lot of us, when we write the script, we do this. We have a little wiggle. You see a line and you're like, oh, a little wiggle. There's not a wiggle there. It's actually a straight line. What's happening is you are being tricked by an optical illusion. So the optical illusion causes your eye to look inward here and inward there. And so what you think you see is this. The line of universal beauty is only really a sixth turn and a sixth turn. So we have a little turn, a straight line, and a little turn. The deposition of weight exists mainly between the 2/3 mark. Now, I know it sounds a little bit technical, but there's a grid, and the grid helps you. The grid's great, actually. So we have a sixth, and we have 2/3. So two sixths give us a third, and 2/3 give us 3/3. So the height of the line is, I work on thirds, sixes, and ninths. The manual doesn't really deal with ninths because the technology is a lot to take in. So the next time I write about it, I will augment it. So this is the angular confinement. And I'm sure you can see how this can work. Apart from the angular confinement, you have something called the elliptical confinement. So the letters are filled with ellipses, not ovals. Why? When you think of an oval, the first thing you think of is an egg. Well, if this is what you're thinking of, your letters are not going to look good. So I thought these should be, the better term for this is an ellipse. The actual term for it is an oblate ellipse. Oblate simply means the top and the bottoms are flattened. Well, I'm using oblate in a slightly different way, and I'm meaning the sides are flattened. So at the back of the manual, there is a glossary to help you with the terminology. Well, if we have and we can see where the ellipses are. So we have one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we have another ellipse that you never see because you're so busy thinking inside of the letter. There is always additional space that you need for a letter form. And that overriding ellipse gives us that. And what this tells us is no other letter should come into this space, because that's the volume that the inked lines will need in order to balance itself. Because of course, you have some writing there. That also helps us to understand where the extent of a flourish would go. So if we're writing, let's say we're writing ball, that is in line with the overriding ellipse, and that's what generates the balance. Now, this theory that I've come up with also teaches you where to flourish. So we have a confinement zone of flourishing. If you decide to go beyond that, you can actually calculate where that zone extends to, so that the balance in the letter is true. It sits beautifully. It's not just a mass of lines, because you know sometimes you do some flourishing and it looks like a snake's pit. That does not happen with this system. And so we have elliptical confinement 1, which is the simplified version, and the overriding version, which is the second version. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, whilst I'm writing, I don't just do this. I'm using a rhythmic nature to write. So we have and this is a third facet called continuous movement. So continuous movement tells us that we are only writing one line. So we're told that there are two parts to the letter. We have the line of universal beauty. Of course, I've come up with a whole new anatomy for the parts. And we have the reverse double ellipse. All of the names for the parts come from English writing master copybooks up to a point. And then I've augmented those names. So they retain that connection with their sort of 17th century ancestors. But when we write, we're told that this is a second line. So we now have the distinction between a mark and a trace. So the mark is on the page, and I'm lifting, so I'm tracing in the air, and I'm going up, and then I'm going back down, and back over, and back around, and I don't just stop here. Look, I'm lifting up, and I'm going down, and I'm going back up, because that's where the next letter starts. So this naturally spaces the letters. Now, continuous movement has two facets. So I've discovered something in the script that I'd never really thought about. And it comes from a question that tons of people have asked. Why does my M not work? And so you're all giggling because you all struggle with this as well, and you're like, yes. The M doesn't work because we're not told that there is another stroke involved. Most of us believe that the M is actually two 55s and two more 55s. There is another stroke embedded in the script called the connective stroke. And the connective stroke is not at 55, it's 50. So you have your grid. You know, when you write the script so long, you could just magic up 55 like that. And normally what we do is we do this. We go up on the 55, and we come down on the 55, and we go up on the 55, and we come down on the 55. Well, that's two A's. Well, it's not even really two A's. So if we do this again, and this is where the technology starts to really shine. So we have 6 divisions, 3. and we have a 55, which is at a sixth and a sixth. We have a 50, which is at a third and a third. And we have a third and a third and a sixth and a sixth. We actually have a grid with all of this on it. So you could plot where you're going. Now the grid's there to help you become confident with the letters. My hope is that eventually you will not need the grid with all these little bits on it, because you really start to feel the letters. You really sense what's happening. So we have 55. Ready? And aim for the third, aim for the third, aim for the top, half over, half under. Here we go. And little curve, third, third. There we go. And sixth, 2/3, 2/3, a sixth, half, aim for the third, aim for the third, aim for the third, and over, and a sixth, and a sixth, and out. This stroke appears, it falls on part of the 55, but it's actually at 50 degrees. And that's why it doesn't work. Now, there's another reason why the M's don't work, just like your V's and your W's. You write an M or a V or a W or an A, and they look like they're falling over. And that's because of this. In the parallelogram, you only really want to go over by a third. You could get away with a half, but if you go beyond that, what you get is now if you take these out, your letter starts to look a little bit more upright, and it's because you've made it top heavy and bottom heavy, so you're causing the letter to rotate on itself. And so these grids help you to not do that, because I am not going home with you, and I'm not going to sit there and tell you what you're doing is wrong, even though I will happily deal with your emails. So it's really important to understand all these little extra lines, because you know, you go up and you go, yay! Okay. You just want to go up and stop and then come down. Now, the other thing that the technology looks at is how you breathe. When we inhale, our body has to push out against itself. When we exhale, the body quite easily collapses. So to exhale, we get a shorter stroke. And to inhale, we get a longer stroke. So an upstroke, and don't forget we're on a diagonal, so it means the strokes are even longer. An upstroke is inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. But as with the symmetry, there are always three. So what's the third thing? So we have an inhalation and an exhalation. When you breathe, you don't go, or you might do. But if you do that, you'll end up on the floor because you would have fainted. But the lungs have to change over. So there's that little area where you breathe in, and then the lungs change over so that you can exhale. And that's when you get to the top of the stroke, and what's happening here? You are changing direction. When you change direction, you have to stop, or you pause. So I've looked at a lot of physics for this. So when you're driving a car, and you see a turn in the road, and you have to take this turn, you don't speed up to take the turn, right? Well, I hope not. Yeah. Some of you are going, I speed up. So, if you're on a bicycle, and you're on a round, you see a roundabout, you know the best thing about a roundabout is, as you pass that little bit on the roundabout, you can just bear down and the bike goes, and you land in, somewhere else. So, it's the same system, because when you take a turn, the tighter the turn, the slower you have to take it. So if you're changing direction, you have to stop and go back on yourself. So I'm gonna do a flourish here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Every time I change direction, I stop. But on a curve, you have to go 1. This is a tight turn at the bottom. So if you think of a roller coaster, you're going down and you're going up because you have to breathe, and you inhale and you inhale and you exhale, little turn, take your time, slowly, and then you come out and little turn, take your time slowly. But here we have a free fall. So it's like you're falling through space because you go up and then you can exhale. And that exhalation area is, that's the third part of the stroke. If we could put this up on the camera. Right. So that brings us to the fourth facet, which is something called variable velocity. When you are taking a turn, you have these different velocities that you have to work with. So I want you to pay attention to what's happening here. So I am going to get from the baseline, and it's really important that this is actually part of your writing structure. When you are writing a letter, particularly a majuscule, you're starting here, yes? How do you get up there? You just put the pen there? Well, if you start at the baseline and you do the connected stroke up and exhale, and slow, little faster, slow, little faster, slow, and down, and little turn, and up, slow, apex, and down, and little turn, and down, and out. So the whole shape is done at different speeds. And by doing the letter at different speeds, you allow the nib time to do its job. So, you know, some of you like to write and you go, pressure! It's a hairline start. So you want to start with a little bit of pressure. So most of you start and you do this. Well, the first sixth is a hairline start. So we have all of this is a thin line, up here and down here. So we're not going which is what a lot of people do, and then they wonder, oh, why doesn't the letter look beautiful? Well, because the stroke is not beautiful. It's because you are attacking the paper. Be gentle. You know, allow the tool time to do its job. Now, this variable velocity, funnily enough, splits, changes at the sixth mark for most of these things. Now, when I started doing this research, I was astounded to find this. We have this line, right? This is the first line. Look at what happens. Okay. This point is a change of speed. This here is a change of speed, and there is a change of speed. These points exist on the first line already, and when the letter is done proportionately and correctly, the second stroke intersects the first line where the speed changes. Okay, now that's crazy. And that's what made me start to think there is a lot more going on here than we understand. Now, I know it sounds really technical. The manual guides you through step by step, and there'll also be some supporting videos that we're making to help you understand more complex issues that's probably better for you to see first. So, that's how the manual works. Now I'm going to delve into a little bit more about how the grid is developed. So you know this exercise, this drill, that people call a drill. Yeah, you're all cringing. You're like, oh, I hate that exercise. This ellipse, when done at 1 to 3, when the ratio is 1 to 3, so the height is 1 and the ratio and the minor axis is 1 and the major axis is 3, you will not believe what I'm going to show you. So you have a ellipse, yes? You following? Okay. Inside that ellipse, you have two minor axes, yes? You also have two major axes. So the ellipse is made up of taking arcs from 4 circles. Inside of the minor circles, the focal point or the center point of that circle is there. If we take the same 3-to-1 ratio, when I saw this, I burst into tears. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And we rotate the shape from a horizontal ellipse to 55 degrees, we get this. Look at where the C starts. And halfway through. There to there. Out. Up. And out. So this is the ellipse here. The circumference of the second ellipse intersects the focal point of the minor axial circle on the right side. And when that happened, I knew that there was geometry here that we couldn't see. I knew we were missing a lot. So this then helped me to work out that this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and that gives us the structure for the grid. So from this, I've been able to work out the widths of every letter. And more importantly, I've been able to work out the widths of every letter and the ligatures between the letters. So in a couple of weeks, we're going to put some new grids up on the website. And these new guidelines on the website, which are astonishing, will regulate when you write a word. So how does it work? Most people, when they do copperplate script, they do this. Yes? Well, if you do this, if you go up at 55 and around a little pulley, so if you think of a rope, there's a little pulley here, so it goes up and over and down. So it goes up at 55, down at 55, and up at 55. If you come down and out and across, you are never going to be able to gauge that distance and regularize that angle. It will always shift. But if you're coming up and down and up at the same angle, then the next letter is only going to be a half of a parallelogram away from the other letter. And so your spacing between the words and the letters starts to regularize. Now, this even compensates for exemptions to the rule. So when you start looking at the exemptions to the rule and you follow the grid, the new guidelines that we're putting up, which will obviously make you blind because there's lots of lines, once you start working with it, you will see how it regulates the writing. Now, the reason why I decided to do this particular guideline, is to help people write more rhythmically. Because one of the biggest problems people have with copperplate script is the writing becomes really irregular. Now, for all calligraphy, you could have really ugly letters and really good spacing, and it looks great. You could have brilliant letters and terrible spacing, and it looks awful. So it's not what you are writing, it's what you are not writing is important. What is the space like? What is the space between the letters like? But what is the space inside of the letters like? And this helps to regulate the writing. So that then led me down a really, really deep rabbit hole. And I really understand Alice falling down that rabbit hole and being confronted with a caterpillar. Because then I started to think, well, if the geometry is real, what else can be applied to this? So I just need to check this as I'm moving across the page. So if the geometry is real, sorry guys, obviously I can't see the phone because I'm this far away. And my eyesight isn't like that great, because I am getting older. If the geometry is real, what else can we see here? This is where it turns into something astonishing. So, I noticed, because one of the things I try to get my students to do, and I know people hate this, but you have to get over it. Lots of people, I tell students, okay, I'd like you to film yourself writing. And they go, okay. And then you say, I'm not asking you to film yourself writing because I have nothing to do. I would like you to watch yourself. Oh, no, I can't do that. Get over yourself, really. This is not about you watching what you're wearing or how you're looking. This is about you watching what you are doing. When you watch yourself write, you learn so much. So, you're sitting there, you do a little video, going to post it on Instagram, you have to find the right spot on the video. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, what's going on here? So you have a nib in a pen staff, because a pen holder is a very nondescript word, a pen staff is a much better word. So you have a nib in a pen staff, and you're writing. What happens? The nib never stays at 55 degrees. It's always sort of dancing around the 55 line. So when you start looking at the videos, you're like, what am I doing? What is happening? So I started to look at this in more detail. Now, I have always known that copperplate script should be written at 55 degrees. I don't know why. That is the angle that I've always known that it should be written at. Some people do it at 54, some people do it at 52.5, some people do it at 56. Okay, fine, do it at whatever angle you want to do it at, but pay attention to the angle. So, I'm looking at my nib wobbling around this 55 degree line. I have excellent control over my pen staff and my nib, and I couldn't understand what was happening. So I thought, okay, there is obviously something happening, but it's still allowing me to produce the kind of letter that I want to produce. So there must be a variance within which the nib can move and still allow you to produce the right shape. So I started to test the variance. So I created a a 1 degree variance, plus or minus the 55, and it still worked. I created a 1.5 degree variance, it still worked. I created a 2 degree variance, it still worked. I went up to 2.5 and the variance still managed to get the nib to produce the same kind of shape. Above 2.5, it didn't work. So I printed off some photographs over a sort of 5-month period, and I measured the wobble, and it showed me that my wobble tends to stay within a variance of tolerance of 2.5 degrees. So I thought, okay, so the nib can work within this variance, plus or minus the 55. Which means that if you write within that variance, you could be 50, you don't have to be at 55 degrees. You could be at 54 degrees, or you could be at 56 degrees. And you would still get that letter to sort of feel the same. I stick to 55 because I've worked out that with the 50 degree connective stroke, it really helps with the A, the M, the N, the V, and the W, which incidentally are very difficult letters, and I thought I'll put them at the end because they're quite difficult. Well, actually, they are the easiest letters in the majuscules. Because as you go into the other letters, they become more difficult. So I thought, okay, fine, let's just sort of bite the bullet here. So I started to think, right, what else needs angles? Of course, you know, we all know the Fibonacci sequence. We know the golden section. We understand that spirals exist and they can be mathematically plotted. And when they're plotted, they work, otherwise a nautilus will drown. So I started to think, how does this relate to sacred geometry? And I came across this process that plants use in most instances, not all instances, to plot where a leaf goes along the stem or where the next petal goes around the pollen ball to have maximum exposure to the sun and minimum overlap with the next petal. So this principle of phyllotaxis uses the golden angle, which is 137.5. I was amazed because once you start looking at this angle, you start understanding how to plot a flourish. So the fourfold symmetry can plot a flourish. So you know you do a flourish, you're all cringing, aren't you? You do a flourish and you look at it and you're like, put it in the bin. Or burn it. Or you look at the flourish and you think, why is this not working? There are reasons why the flourish wouldn't work. There are conventions to make a flourish work. This has a lot to do with it. So I'm sitting in the studio, and you know, I will happily admit to you, I hear voices, I hear lots of voices talk to me in my head, and I talk back to them. And so one of the voices said to me, you have two angles. So I sat there thinking, what? And it shouted at me and said, you have two angles. And I went, all right. Don't shout, you know, you're in my head, it's loud enough. So I thought, two angles. What two angles do I have? What two angles do I have? I have 137.5 and I have 55. Right? So 137.5 and 55. If you divide 137.5 by 55, what do you get? The variance of tolerance. And then I cried. Because I realized that there was a lot more going on here than we ever imagined. So then I started to look at this variance of tolerance. I'm not really going to go into this discovery. I've made a new discovery with the golden section, and I sent it off to Stanford University to look at, and they said, we think you're onto something here, Sandra. I'm just working through the mathematics on that and physics. And every time an email comes in, I sit and I cry because I can't believe it's so different. But I want you to understand something that I stumbled across recently as well. I was on a flight to Hong Kong, and there was this little documentary, which was only 45 minutes long. And I thought, let's have a look at this. And the documentary was on something called biogeometry. So we have this rigid geometric structure that we look to. We know that when bees produce a honeycomb, they use an hexagonal pattern to build the honeycomb. They don't have protractors. They don't have compasses. They build an hexagonal pattern that is biogeometrically correct. The angles are not perfectly 60 degrees, but they are close enough that they allow the hexagonal pattern to work accurately. This fourfold symmetry system that I've come up with is a geometric construct. I expect you to use the framework to help you understand how to build a letter. What I also expect you to do is to become comfortable enough to walk away from the framework because you can feel how the geometry works. Once you know that this exists and it's in your mind, you won't have to rely on it because you can sense where you're going to plot the next shape. The angular confinement system is there to confine you so that the shapes don't get too big. It's there to confine you so that you can aim for different points on this straight line to plot the curve. But once you take it away, you have a sense that it is always there. And it's how to get you to move from this solid, rigid geometry into a beautiful sense of biogeometry. Now, I'm just going to share something with you that I discovered 10 days ago. So you know this little turn here? When you go, so think of a roller coaster, you go, clink, 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 clink. You're looking down going, please get me off this. And then it goes down. It's the same breath, right? So you're breathing, and you're going, and well, this angle of free fall measures 137.5 degrees. So it's not obviously it's not exactly 137.5 degrees because we all have different ones, but it's roughly 137.5 degrees. And so by allowing the geometry to help us, the script blossoms into something so beautiful because it regulates our rhythm. So for writing, let's just add some more lines there. So you know these markers are great because you could use them as a ruler as well. But this is a new Kuretake brush. So they let me play with these at ISOT in July, and they are stunning. They are so beautiful. And down, and up, and down, and up, and down, and up, down, and up at 55, and down at 55, up and down, and up, and up, down, and out, and down at 55, and up at 55, and 1, and 2, now, I'm looking, you're not seeing my eyes unfortunately, I'm looking at where I started. Sorry. And this is what the rhythm does. Lots of people have asked me, how do you do that? This is how I do it. The rhythm helps you to connect the flourishes up. Now, did you see how slowly and rhythmically I did that? Now, the other thing that I wanted to show you before we go to the other table is the thing that people freak out about. Just need to see where the camera is. Ta-da! You know this? You know that? You're like, yes, that's me. This is ruining your nibs. So if you like to spend money and ruin nibs, then great, you know. What you want is something called, so I've discovered, right, we know that the majuscules come from the Roman imperial capitals. We know that the minuscules come from the uncial script. When you're tackling a majuscule, you tackle it and up and down and out, right? When you're tackling a minuscule, so majuscules are tackled anti-clockwise. Minuscules are tackled we have the H. So we have, and one, oh, wait, one, sorry, this goes this way. And this goes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and G. So we have a different direction for the elliptic, because one of the things I've done in one of the worksheets is we have a letter, we have a space for you to do some elliptical, and then you go and you do a letter, so that you're sort of getting a little bit more relaxed. But I also found that if the majuscule has a basic line, which is the line of universal beauty, the minuscule has a basic line, which is the swelled stroke. So with the minuscules, we have this stroke. If we take that stroke and we cut the top and the bottom off, and we flip this around, what we get is that. So the I stroke gives us the structure for the minuscules. Each part of the, each facet, each aspect of the writing system has a different stroke. So I thought, well, if the letters have different strokes, then there must be a base stroke for the flourishing. And so I came up with a stroke that I call the line of universal beauty loop, because it loops back on itself horizontally. Because this gives us right? The other thing it does is this still in the frame? Can you just check that?
Yes.
The other thing it does is, I always thought that this